Hi everyone, it's Rio Cloudsing. In today's session, we'll be conducting an uncut overview of the Microsoft Entra ID portal. We'll be touching base on what Microsoft Entra ID is and running through all the different capabilities within Microsoft Entra ID. So what is Microsoft Entra ID? Well, one is an identity provider, which in essence enacts identity and access management capabilities. It also provides the ability to use modern authentication to enroll ourselves into multi-factor authentication and allows users to use one set of credentials to access multiple given applications, also known as single sign-on. So that's what Microsoft Entra ID is. And it's an evolution of Active Directory domain services, but is much more. It's not just a lift and shift of Active Directory domain services to the cloud. It provides us the ability to enact conditional access, identity protection, privileged identity management, and a whole load of different entitlement management capabilities. And we'll start to look at these different capabilities during today's session. So, first things first, you need to be assigned global administrator rights for your user account so you can access the entra.microsoft.com portal. And you'll also have to have the applicable licenses assigned to your user account, whether or not that's Entra ID Plan 1 or Plan 2 to make use of the premium capabilities. Of course, if you don't have the premium licensing assigned to your user account, you'll get limited functionality within the portal, and you'll start to see that as and when we go through the portal itself today. So, once you navigated to entra.microsoft.com, you'll first be presented the Entra ID dashboard, which will show you your customer tenant name, which in this instance is SPF Demo Tenant, and there'll be a whole load of widgets, starting off with setup guides around directory synchronization, e.g. syncing your identities from on-prem Active Directory domain services up to Microsoft Entra ID, in other words, the cloud, to make use of the cloud capabilities alongside your on-prem capabilities. We also have a billing pane here where we can see the subscriptions purchased, whether or not that be Microsoft Business Premium, Microsoft 365 E5, and how many services we've purchased, alongside how many of those services have been assigned to given individuals in your organization. If I scroll down slightly more, we've got the quick navigation pane, which can take us to all the different services down the left-hand side, but from kind of a single pane of glass. One being the tenant overview, where we can, identify and find our tenant ID, which is our unique identifier for our organization, alongside our default directory domain name, which whenever you create a Microsoft 365 tenant, you're always given a .on Microsoft.com. We've got the All Users pane, where we can create user accounts, whether or not that be fully corporate users, i.e. users who work for your organization, or external users, also known as a business-to-business collaboration. We've got the Group pane, or node here, where we can create Microsoft 365 security groups or Microsoft 365 collaboration groups, and also Devices, where we can see fully corporate-owned devices versus those personally registered devices, or also known as BOD devices. If I scroll down, we've got the Identity Secure Score, which is a subset of the overriding Microsoft Secure Score you find in Microsoft Defender XDR. However, it is only and solely focused on your identity, whether or not that be via authentication authorization, looking at whether or not your users have got multi-factor authentication enforced, whether or not you've enabled self-service passwords reset so that your users can reset their own passwords. All of these known recommendations, which are prioritized from high to low, will at the end of the day improve your secure score. And the higher your secure score, the more reassurance you've got that you're reducing that chance of compromise. And if we scroll down slightly more, we've got blogs and announcements, which shows us what's coming up. Have there been any changes in the way the features and capabilities work in Microsoft Entra ID, and are Microsoft pushing out any new capabilities into the Microsoft Entra ID portal over the next coming weeks or coming months? So the dashboard is kind of your single pane of glass of navigating the dashboard, health and security advice around your given organization. So if we click Identity on the left-hand side and click Overview, this will take us to an overview pane which will give us our customer tenant name, which we saw in the previous pane. Our tenant ID, which is unique to any given organization. Okay, and you can use this via a whois lookup to see what the tenant name is for that particular organization if you've only got their tenant ID. And it's also used when raising tickets to Microsoft support. They may ask you for your tenant ID so they can locate your customer tenant. We've got the primary domain name here, which is given whenever a Microsoft 365 tenant is created. You're usually given the .Microsoft domain name, and of course you can create your own custom domain names to assign that to your Microsoft tenant via uploading a TXT and MX record. TXT for proven ownership of the domain, and the MX record is given to direct where your emails need to go from and to, and then kind of your overriding license. Are you on Entra ID Plan 1 or are you on Entra ID Plan 2? To be honest, P1 versus P2, there's not much of a difference other than P2, you get the use of privileged identity management, which is your just-in-time and just-stuff access for role-based access control. You get your enhanced conditional access with identity protection integration, and a whole load of entitlement management capabilities such as access reviews with machine learning capabilities. However, with Microsoft Entra ID Plan 1, you get baseline conditional access, you get the extended audit logs from 7 days to 30 days, so on and so forth. We've then got a whole load of information around the objects within our organization, how many users are listed in our organization, whether or not, like I said, they're fully corporate user accounts or guest user accounts. The groups, how many groups have we got, whether or not they're Microsoft 365 security groups, which are kind of containerized groups for our users, so we can assign security policies to, or are they Microsoft 365 collaboration groups where maybe we want to make a mail-enabled group so that we can send an email to all those given users, act as if it was a distribution list per se. Applications, app registrations, they're used for a variety of different reasons and purposes. One for API permissions, for maybe third-party services. Two, for global secure access, where maybe we're trying to connect to on-premise apps and make use of the security capabilities in the cloud to protect those line of business applications. And then we've got devices, which, like I said, could be corporate, could be personally registered. We can also distinguish whether or not the devices are Entra ID domain joined from out the box or via Windows Autopilot. There's a whole lot of information we can get from that pane. If I scroll down, there's a whole load of stuff around, alerts to make sure that you're being very security conscious. I.e., this is saying, okay, I've got 12 global administrators in my organization. That should really be limited to maybe 5 or under 3, right? Because of course, the more global administrators we have, the more chance, well, not the more chance we've got for compromise, but if one of those user accounts were compromised or did in fact get compromised, then of course they have access to all the known services within my organization, which slightly is a misconception, because global administrator doesn't necessarily give you everything, but 90% of the stuff it gives you access to. I mean, Defender XDR, for example, Microsoft Purview has its own unified RBAC, so in essence you do need to assign its own given rights to view information, especially when we're talking data. There's information around migrating the converged authentication methods policy. So Microsoft are going through the process of deprecating legacy per-user multi-factor authentication before September 2025, which means if you were enforcing users on an individual basis, like one by one through the per-user MFA pane, 3 to 5 years ago it was in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, that you need to marry and match the authentication methods you're using from previous legacy auth to the new authentication methods blade and use that migration wizard to migrate those users from that to that. I've got a whole load of videos on how to conduct that. That's not a problem. And then a whole load of other widgets around, navigating to identity secure again, individual user information, setting up Microsoft Entra Connect for that directory synchronization, so on and so forth. So if we move to users, this is where we can see the users in our organization, and whether or not they are fully full members in my organization, or business-to-business collaboration users, where I've invited an external party into my organization to access my corporate resources. This column here is if we have Microsoft Entra Connect Sync or Entra Cloud Sync. There's two different variants or ways of synchronizing identities from on-prem to cloud. And if this was to show yes, it would mean we do have that directory synchronization enabled between on-prem and cloud, and these users' source of authority is on-prem rather than Microsoft Entra ID, e.g. the cloud. And then, of course, we can see their UPNs, so their user principal names, and whether or not we've got any extended attributes assigned to these user accounts. Up here, we can create a user. If we create a user here, we still have an option to create a B2B user, but generally, if you press create a user here, you're creating a fully pledged member in your organization. And inviting external users is where we want to invite those external parties into our organizations to access our line of business apps and our collateral within our organization. Think of this as maybe you've got an external marketing agency and you want to invite them into your organization so they can white label your internal content. That may be a scenario from that perspective. We can delete users. If we delete users, we have 30 days to recover the user accounts, and we can recover the user accounts via the deleted users pane here. We can conduct bulk operations where we can bulk create user accounts, we can bulk invite users from external and bulk delete. And also we can access the per user MFA node, where I said we can migrate those users from per user MFA to the new authentication methods blade, which I'm going to talk about in a second. However, if I was to click onto one of these users, let's say I clicked onto myself, you can see my UPN, you can see my object ID. Just like the tenant ID is unique to the individual in this case, which is Rio. When this user account was created, whether or not they're a member or a guest user, and what groups they're assigned to, applications, assigned roles, and any licenses they're assigned to. I can edit the properties for this user, so maybe I want to edit their department or their job title, or the license they're assigned, or and not necessarily the license, because a quick tip: Microsoft have removed the license assignment from Microsoft Entra ID. You now need to assign licenses in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. However, you can still see licenses assigned in the Microsoft Entra ID portal. But if I was to select edit properties, like I said, I can change whether or not a user is a member or a guest user. If I go to job information, I can see the department. If they've got an employee ID, I can assign that to them, and their reporting manager. This reporting manager field is used when we're looking at what kind of workflow approvals or workflow management, and for your Outlook calendar and all that lovely stuff in Viva Engage. Right? It will show you who your line manager is, and of course, approvals can then be sent to that particular line manager you assign. If I have on-premise synchronization, I'll see a whole load of on-prem attributes there as well, where I can see the source of authority attributes which have been assigned from an on-prem AD domain services perspective, and they will reflect an Entra ID, so I don't have to navigate or remote onto the domain controller and view it that way. I can view it through Microsoft Entra ID. One other thing around user properties, they do need to be assigned a usage location, the user accounts, right? Your usage location is used for license assignment. If there is no usage location assigned, Microsoft or Microsoft's org does not know how to bill you in what currency. Therefore, it won't allow you to assign a license. So you need to assign a usage location whenever creating a user account. There's a few other bits up here, like we can reset the password. If we reset a password from the Entra ID perspective, it will generate us an automatically generated password. If we reset the password from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, it will allow us to choose a password we want to reset it to, or automatically generate a password for the user account. So with Microsoft 365, you get a few more options versus Entra ID. Revoke sessions is all around revoking the PRT token for the user, which is the primary refresh token. The primary refresh token is the orchestrator of access tokens for the user account. Access tokens are presented to applications, which within an access token have what we like to call a claim, which is information around the user and what they're trying to access and whether or not they have the relevant privileges to access that application. So we would tend to use revoke sessions when someone's either left on kind of bad terms and we block their user account, or something's happened to that user account. We don't want them to access a given application. We can revoke their sessions. Why? Well, an access token can remain active for 35 to 55 minutes, even when blocking a user account, right? That's just, they're short-lived tokens. PRT token can remain active for 14 days. And what we want to do, we want to revoke both. And we can revoke that via using the revoke sessions, so that the access token is revoked instantly rather than having to wait that hour. Because, of course, within that hour interval, that user account could be deleting other objects, could be exfiltrating data from your organization if they're passing it on to a new employer. There's a whole load of other stuff you don't want them to do, so we can revoke the sessions, right? We've got signing logs and audit logs. Signing logs tends to be used when we're looking at maybe potential compromise, or an account has been compromised and we need to find out what happened and when it happened and why it happened. Well, if we've got Entra ID free, we can filter back 7 days. If we've got Entra ID premium licensing, we can filter back last month of activities, right? If it's last month of activities, we can press last 1 month, and it'll break down into interactive and non-interactive logs. Interactive logs is if a user is physically signing in to the user account itself. Non-interactive logs is more service account interaction, API interaction, back-end daemon processes being conducted, right? So we tend to look at the interactive sign log because this tends to be when someone's actually physically typed in a credential, that being the username and password, right? Here I can see a entry for a sign-in log. I can see, okay, the date and time my user account signed into this portal, which in this instance is the Microsoft Azure portal. I can see the username assigned to this user, whether or not they're using continuous access evaluation. Continuous access evaluation is the ability to revoke access tokens in near real time without having to select the revoke sessions button, and this is configured via conditional access. We can see that the MFA requirement is satisfied by the claim of the token, so that token was still active as and when I was signing into the Azure portal. Therefore, I didn't have to go through the process of authenticating via the Authenticator app at this point in time, because that access token was still valid. If I was to scroll down, I can see, okay, who the IDP provider is in this instance, which is Microsoft Entra ID, right? And also whether or not token protection is enabled. Okay, token protection means the PRT token is bound to the device, so that adversary in the middle attacks can't compromise the access token and issue their own. Can't compromise the PRT token and issue their own access tokens. If it's unbound, of course, funny enough, it's bound for compromise, right? But if it is bound, then the threat vector and the threat actor can't take that PRT token and issue their own access tokens. So a whole lot of information there you can take. Location will give you your IP address of where the user resides. This can fluctuate based on whether or not you're using a VPN or using some sort of proxy. You'll see whether or not the connection piece is going through Global Secure Access, which is our SASE solutions, or Microsoft Security Service Edge solution, in which we can conduct web content filtering and private access connection to your line of business applications. It acts as if it was a virtual private network, but transverses the connectivity over the Microsoft backbone network. We've got device information where we can see whether or not the device is Windows 10 or Windows 11. Once again, this can fluctuate based on whether or not you're using the actual machine you've joined and signing into that machine. i.e., I'm not signing into a machine at this point via the machine was joined to my user account. I'm just signing in via HTML5 browser. Therefore, it may fluctuate based on what it can see and what it can identify. Authentication details, whether or not I'm using per user multi-factor authentication, or how am I enforcing MFA? Am I enforcing MFA through conditional access? Am I enforcing MFA through security defaults? Am I enforcing MFA through per user multi-factor authentication? There's so much information to know and understand, but this will reflect and this will give you an accurate output on what's actually enforcing multi-factor authentication for this particular user account. And the conditional access policies I have enabled, okay, whether or not they're, in report-only mode, where we're auditing what would have happened if the conditional access policy was enabled, whether or not they're enabled and they're actually enforcing access controls or session controls, or currently disabled. This will show you. We then also have the report-only tab, where we can say, okay, what would the action have been if that conditional access policy was enabled? Okay, you're probably asking what conditional access policy is. Think of this as kind of like an if-when statement. The way it works is we assign a policy to a user. They satisfy a whole load of conditions, whether or not that be your device being compliant, or you're in a particular location, or your Entra ID hybrid joined. And then, based on those conditions, and based on those conditions being satisfied, we can then enforce access controls. Whether or not that be just bluntly block the user account, or allow but require multi-factor authentication, or alternatively conduct periodic re-authentication where they need to sign in every 2 hours. There's a whole load of the art of the possible with conditional access. Tends to be people use conditional access to require MFA, block legacy authentication such as IMAP and POP, and segment the authentication methods per department. IT team may have to have more stringent authentication methods than the sales team, for example, because the IT team are accessing administrative portals. They may need to use FIDO2 alliance keys or pass keys, now called. They may need to use Windows 10 for Business, while the sales team may need to use the Authenticator app or SMS or phone call. You probably get it. There's a whole lot of information around the roles assigned to my user account. The roles can be, of course, Global Administrator. However, we don't want to assign Global Administrator to every user account. We may want to assign a user Password Administrator so they can reset passwords and reset passwords only. Or User Administrator, where they can create user accounts or invite B2B users into my organization. And these roles can be either statically assigned or permanently statically assigned, or they could be eligible for an assignment. They could be eligible for an assignment via what we like to call privileged identity management. This is where the Entra ID Plan 2 capabilities come into play. So we can say, okay, we've got a statement of work, we've got a project, kind of a project manager coming in, or someone to conduct some professional services for us in the next couple of weeks. They need global administrator access for this, between this period of time, this start time and this end time. After such time, that role needs to be removed, right? We can use privileged identity management to either assign that role during that period of time, then after such time it's removed, or say to the person who's coming in, actually, you can elevate yourself into this role between this period of time and this period of time. After such time, you won't be able to elevate yourself in, and it will also be removed. So there's a whole load of options around role assignment when it comes to privileged identity management. However, for this particular user account, they've been assigned a global administrator role, right, and this is statically assigned. If we wanted to, dynamically assign roles, we can create a Microsoft 365 security group, maybe create a dynamic group, which, as and when we assign users to that group, or whenever that dynamic rule syntax picks up users and puts it into the group, they're automatically assigned the given role we assign to that group. So we could have a global administrator group, and all the people in that group are then assigned the global administrator role, right? There's a whole lot of options there. Admin units are isolation groups, right? Let's say we have a UK IT arm team and we have a US IT arm team, and the respective geographs manage their respective geo users. So the UK team will manage the UK users, the US team will manage the US users, and we don't want them, cross managing each users, all right, or coexistently managing each user subsets. Then we can isolate them into administrative units. That's totally possible as well. We then can see license information and authentication methods as well, but we'll get onto that in a second. So I talked quite a lot around user accounts here and user account assignment. There is also user settings, which by default now users can register applications set to disabled. This used to be enabled, so you want to make sure this is disabled, because of course if an account gets compromised and they have global administrator rights, or a standardized user gets compromised and they have and they don't have any rights, they can still register applications which may be malicious intent, or there may be intent to exfiltrate data. Therefore, we don't want the register applications toggle to be enabled. We also want to restrict non-admin users from creating tenants. Okay, let's think of this as, a user in the past has created a Power BI trial or something around those lines, which back in the day it used to create directory tenants, and those directory tenants will then be assigned to your primary tenant. You want to stop that from happening, so you can restrict that. And users from creating security groups, this is more of a tidy up exercise. You don't want user accounts creating a whole load of security groups, because of course 6 months down the line you as an IT administrator then have to go and tidy that up and remove all those dead entities. right? So that's a few bits around the user settings. Um, we have groups here. Groups is where, like I said, we can create those Microsoft 365 security groups, those Microsoft 365 groups, and if I was to press new group, we see I've only got those two options. If I was to access the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, I can create not just security groups, not just Microsoft 365 groups, but also mail-enabled groups, distribution lists, groups with teams attached, that type of stuff. But within Microsoft Entra ID, we only get the security and Microsoft 365 option. Security tends to be what we create majority of the time within Microsoft Entra ID, because of course this is isolation of users, and then of course based on that isolation of users we can then assign the applicable security permissions. We can give it a name. We can say whether or not, like I said, we can assign roles to this group, and of course assign the respective users to that group so that they inherit the role itself. Or we can change the membership type to dynamic user and say, okay, anyone in the sales department with the sales property, which we looked at the properties earlier, will automatically propagate into this security group. Alternatively, we could say, okay, let's select dynamic device, and we say, okay, any autopiloted devices, not going through that out-box experience, any autopiloted devices where we've uploaded the PKID or the PUID, or however we went ahead and uploaded that hardware hash ID, automatically propagate into here, and then we assign the applicable policies based on that, right? Whole load, once again, of the art of the possible. But if I was to click on dynamic membership rule for user, for example, it's as simple as clicking the operator, which may be department in this case, equals value sales, right? Then not only it propagates the rule syntax, we can validate the rule, and we can add a user here, and we can see whether or not that user would then show up in this group based on the rule syntax I've created. And of course, I validated this, and it's saying, okay, Steve Miles is not part of the sales department, therefore he will not show up in this group if we were to create this rule syntax. Is a good way of testing out your outcome before actually creating the group or creating the syntax. So that's a group. Same principle here. If we delete a group here, right, we've got 30 days to recover in the deleted groups pane. And we've also got a whole lot of settings around group, where we can manage group membership requests for my groups through that approval workflow. We can allow users to create security groups in the Azure portal or API or PowerShell, as well as create Microsoft 365 groups. Okay, this may be something you want to sanitize and check before doing anything else. We've then got devices, and this is where we can see whether or not devices are corporately owned or personally registered, and also distinguish between those out-of-box enrollments and those Windows Autopilot enrollments. So if you see the purple icon here, it means the device is autopiloted. If it's blue, it's just generally Entra joined through the Access Work or School pane or through the out-of-box experience. Okay. Other than that, we can see whether or not the device is Entra joined or Entra registered, and the MDM authority, which is the Mobile Device Management Authority. So if the Mobile Device Management Authority is Microsoft Intune, it means it's fully enrolled into not only your tenant, but also Microsoft Intune. And Microsoft Intune can push out what we like to call configuration profiles and Microsoft compliance policies to make sure your device is up to date and secure. And if we were to enhance on that, we could create those compliance policies, and we can check whether or not those devices are compliant based on particular peripherals, such as whether or not my antivirus is up to date, whether or not it's got BitLocker enabled, whether or not it's got code integrity enabled, a whole lot of other stuff we can look at, and of course when it was registered and the activity date and time on that particular piece. If I was to scroll down slightly more, we can see those applications here, and then I can click on Enterprise Applications. Crucial applications at the moment you want to make sure exist in your organization are Copilot applications, one for Security Copilot, one for Enterprise Copilot. I created a video on this previously when I went through the process of creating this through connecting to the MG Graph PowerShell module. But this is very useful when you want to enact and enforce security controls around people accessing Copilot for Microsoft 365 and Copilot for security, rather than just, enacting security across your user context and your user identity. You can actually add an extra additional layer through adding this app registration and associating that app registration with a conditional access policy. There's a whole load of capability there. Protection. This is where, of course, we can see the identity protection dashboard, and this all around real-time risk detection upon user signing or user activity, right? And it's broken down to user risk and sign-in risk. Sign-in risk or user risk being based on maybe impossible travel, i.e. I can't travel from the UK to the US in 30 minutes. That's impossible. Therefore, the machine learning algorithms within Microsoft will detect that, as well as their threat intelligence teams, and send an alert to you as a global administrator. Or it may be a typical travel where maybe I sign in from the UK between 8 AM till 5 PM on Monday to Friday, but for some reason on a Sunday I'm signing in from Russia at 4 PM. That's very much atypical. Therefore, you will be alerted as a global administrator, and of course you can put some actions around that using conditional access. Okay, this is what identity protection is. So there's a whole load more activities it detects, such as adversary in the middle attacks, PRT token compromises, unknown IP address, location, whole load of stuff here. And this dashboard's great, right? Because we can see the number of attacks blocked, number of users protected. If you don't have an in-house SOC team, or you do have an in-house SOC team, this is a great piece of information to understand the mean time to remediate high-risk users across your organisation, as well as if I scroll down, I can see where those sign-in attempts are coming from. If you know your operations are only in the UK and Ireland, but for some reason you're getting a sign-in attempt from over in Russia, then you know there's probably an issue, right? And of course, we could set up weekly digest emails and emails based on particular user at risk, rather than just a summary email which sends out every Friday, right? Conditional access, like I said, is all around maybe enforcing MFA, deprecating legacy auth protocols, restricting particular locations in regards to sign-in. There's a whole load of the art of the possible there. A few things to note here is we can create conditional access policies via a template, where we could just opt into kind of an out-of-box policy and enforce it across our organizations. And these are broken down into key pillars, such as zero trust methodology, which is all around kind of, segmenting access, least privilege, make sure you use the strongest authentication method, that type of stuff. Or alternatively, you can create your own custom conditional access policy where you can define this from the outset. And I've got previous videos on that, so I'm not going to bore you to death with creating that particular piece. And then, of course, we've got what if, which is the ability to simulate conditional access policies, right, to make sure they're working properly. Similar to the way report-only mode works, but what if we can simulate it at any point in time we want, right? I can say, okay, if I'm user A and I'm signing in from this app, from this location, with this given risk assigned, does a conditional access policy enforce or not enforce? That's what if. What if this happens, right, is quite self-explanatory from the naming convention. So like I said, we can create policies from template, we can create our own custom policy, we can simulate the policy, and of course this is then where you see those policies you've created, right? And like I said, if you've got that identity protection integration between conditional access and identity protection, then that's an Entra ID Plan 2 license. One thing to finish off with conditional access, we do have the Microsoft managed policies, which is all around. So Microsoft went through a period of enforcing conditional access policies for those customer tenants who did have the necessary license but wasn't using conditional access. They were maybe using security defaults or per user. Then they would enforce a conditional access policy on your behalf to enforce maybe MFA. And they'll put it in a 90-day report-only mode for you as an IT administrator to figure out whether or not you want to enable that or not. And after that 90-day rolling period, it would enforce. But you as an IT administrator got that 90-day period to figure out whether or not you want to disable it, enable it, or retain it in report-only mode, right? That was kind of Microsoft-led transition of making sure you were making the most out of your licensing and making sure you were secure based on your identity secure score. We've got authentication methods here, which is of course that new authentication method blade where we're moving away from per user MFA to the new authentication method blade, and this is what we need to migrate to. So maybe let's say you were using the pass keys or FIDO2 keys in per user MFA. Therefore, you would need to enable in here as well. Because, of course, if you disable in here and you conduct the migration, The users won't have the ability to use their passkeys anymore because you've disabled it in the new pane. Therefore, they would have to go through re-enrollment. So, in regards and in relation to, stopping productivity and reducing or making sure we retain productivity, we want to make sure we enable it in both areas. And Microsoft, for those tenants who are in the phase of migrating, have got a migration wizard which you can enroll into, and it will conduct the marry up for you and make sure that you're using the most appropriate methods in regards to auth strength. Right. Password reset is all around self-service password reset, so this gives the ability for end users to reset their own passwords by navigating to aka.ms/SSPR. So this alleviates a whole load of burden on your IT service desk team in-house in regards to resetting passwords, and allows them to reset their own passwords, right? As long as they've got a second auth method enabled, which you can of course enforce upon next sign-in or however you want to go about it. Or alternatively, you can enable a registration campaign, and that will ask users to register their own authentication method upon next sign-in. So if I scroll down slightly, we have got our protection pane again, where we can access the same panes such as identity protection, conditional access, auth method, and SSPR. We've got some identity governance capabilities here around entitlement management, which we can conduct access reviews, and we can say, okay, if an identity hasn't, been active in the past 90 days, or an identity hasn't accessed a group in the past 90 days, then maybe we want to remove that user from that group, right? It's a way to remove redundant entities or entities which haven't signed in for a while. Or it may be, okay, I'm not going to choose whether or not that user is removed from that group, but I'm going to go for that workflow approval where we've assigned a user a line manager, and that workflow approval is going to say, okay, line manager, does this user still need this group? Does this user still need this role? And we could do that through access reviews. Access packages, on the other hand, are if you've got a new starter joining and you want to make sure they've got all the applicable and appropriate access on their first day, then you can consolidate a whole lot of resources in an access package, assign it to a user, and when they sign in for the first time on day one, they can access their My Account and enroll into that package, and then it provides them access to all the known resources they need to have access to. Other than that, we've got Global Secure Access, which is Microsoft Security Service Edge solution, which is all around private and public access. Private and internet access. Internet access is all around web content filtering, around maybe restricting web categories such as gambling, social media, pornographic sites, that type of stuff. Alternatively, you can restrict fully qualified domain names and utilize wildcards, and you can allow or block those particular sites. This is very similar to Defender XDR web content filtering. At the moment, with web content filtering, Defender XDR takes precedence. However, this may or may not be included in your already existing licensing, just like Defender for Business or web content filtering. So if you're on Business Premium, you've already got this, right? With the private access, this is where, okay, this is similar to application proxy, where we could bring web applications up from on-prem to the cloud, but there's a limitation around non-web apps, such as RDP, SMB, SSH, that type of stuff. We can now bring those up, right? We could bring web apps and non-web apps from on-prem to the cloud and make use of conditional access. So we could say, okay, if you're remoted onto this VDI from an on-premise perspective, you need to go through MFA because, of course, we've assigned a conditional access policy to that. Because we were able to do that because we brought the app from on-prem to the cloud, created it as an app registration, and assigned that to conditional access policy, right? Or we could say, okay, you're accessing this given app from an on-premise perspective, we're going to present a whole load of T's and C's to you. You need to run through the security T's and C's first before you access this given application. That's totally possible as well, because we can use conditional access for that as well. And of course, leak credentials through identity protection and a whole load of other capabilities. But this was just me rambling on for quite a few minutes around Entra ID. Of course, there's a whole load more stuff here, but I'm just trying to consolidate this as quick as possible. Any questions, or you want to take anything offline with me on a one-to-one basis, please let me know. But that was a quick overview of the Microsoft Entra ID portal. Thank you very much.